Hello, I will have a brief session about Entra IDE application specifically, but first of all, I will tell a little bit who I am. I'm a lead security architect at Storebrand, a financial corporation. In the past, I've been a consultant for over 10 years. Being a consultant, I've seen a lot of different kind of um, setups on Entra IDE and Azure in general. Also, I'm a part of Microsoft Security User Group Norway. That's in Meetup. So if you want to have session like this or want to just watch them, we have virtual sessions. So you can go in sessionize and apply for a session or just join the community. Apart from hacking computers and Entra IDE and stuff like that, I play some games during winter and also playing disc golf on summer. Recently, I became a Microsoft Security MVP, and I will share some insights in that area now. So this is what I'm planning to go through today. I will tell a little bit about the landscape around identity, showcase some how you can bypass MFA, basic understanding of how an Entra ID application looks like, some detection and protection options, and a third-party consent application demo. Also, we'll go through some tools about where do we begin to get insights and where do we start basically. So how we can get those tier 0 application basically. So moving on. So this is from the Microsoft Defense report that was recently published. So I have taken out a bit from the threat landscape from identity perspective, mostly Europe. So in this picture here, we see that Russia in particular are targeting Europe mostly, and government and IT is the most attacked sectors. As you also see that from Microsoft, they claim that it's 600 million identity attacks per day, although MFA blocks most of them, meaning that the threat actors are shifting their focus to other than passwords. One interesting key takeaway is also that Microsoft found that only 2.6 of workload identity permissions were used, and 51% was completely inactive. That's a pretty huge number. Moreover, we see an increase of human-operated ransomware encounters. So this is a statistics from ransomware. Although that the encounters is on a rise, we can see that the graph on the actual organization that is ransomed is lower. So that is a good statistics overall. But still, it doesn't mean that threat actors are not seeking to gain foothold and ultimately deploy a ransomware on your organization. So this is also from the same report. So as we see here that 99% of the identity attacks are password attacks, mostly phishing, password spray, and breach replay attacks. And we notice that 1% of the attacks is something other. So the attackers are mostly now focusing more towards infrastructure compromise, the targeting infrastructure, and also they're doing token theft with for example, phishing with tools like Evil Engine X or similar. So they're acting as a man in the middle, stealing your tokens with MFA claims. Pretty hard to protect against those. And they're also doing the traditional MFA fatigue and SIM swapping attacks. So Microsoft states that hackers now are conducting more towards exploiting applications and bypassing authentication mechanisms. So an attacker who manipulates your identity can also manipulate any resource or process that this identity is trusted access with, both on-premise and cloud services. So next we will see about use case from this report, some tactics, techniques, and procedures used by Octotempest, aka Scattered Spider. So we will mostly in this session see about the initial access and the discovery process. But what we see here is that they are starting with this and they're trying to move lateral, and the ultimate goal is to deploy, in this scenario, Black Hat ransomware and get money basically. So Octotempest is a financially motivated cyber criminal group. They are doing a wide range of adversary in the middle attacks. They are also using native tools to exfiltrate data. So the use is Azure Data Factory with automated pipelines and transferring data with the secure file protocols to their data centers. So if we think a little bit about this, when you're creating an application or accessing an application from a third party, you should do some basic threat modeling. Threat modeling is critical when we deploy application or accept application into our Entra ID. This is a very simplified drawing, but basically here that we can see that Alfred here is a high value target or high value asset. So threats towards Alfred is, for example, in this scenario, the Joker, and then we need to build some protective mechanism and hide locations so the Joker cannot get to Alfred. So we're building a security system. Pretty basic, but this is one of the key takeaways in the same Microsoft report, that organizations should identify the most likely attack paths leading to critical assets and try to mitigate them. So understanding your attack paths is key for any organization or any applications. As we see here that 90% of the organization was at least one attack path, and 61% was leading to a sensitive account. On the bottom here we can see that 22% had an attack path in cloud. That was pretty low, but 80% of all organizations have attack paths that expose critical assets. So it's very important. So now I will head over to the demo to showcase the recon phase. So in this demonstration, I will mimic that I have stolen the user's password here. So I have got that via the dark web, or for example, man in the middle attack, or just by shoulder surfing. or another means, it's basically pretty easy to get passwords. So with the user's passwords, I will see how much information I can get from the Entra ID tenant and see if I can execute towards some of the first party applications in Entra ID. So I set up a tenant about 3 weeks ago with the security defaults on. So I will head over to that tenant now. So here's this tenant. So I have done nothing fancy here. So here's security defaults on. We have P2 license, a couple of users. So in this example, we will mimic that I have stolen Diego's password. Diego is just a normal user without anything, roles or anything. So moving over. So to execute this attack, I will use something called MFA sweep that is open, free to use. So I only want to use some certain functions on this application. I will target this client ID, which is graph API. So I will load this into my memory here. Back to my script. So if we're wondering how we can find tenant information, that is pretty easy. If we, for example, go in here, we can, for example, view like, yeah, I only got this weird. So here we have the tenant ID. This works on every tenant basically. Pretty easy. So we can see that this is matching. So I'm loading in this user's username and tenant ID. And since I don't want to show the whole YouTube this password, I will load it into a secure string. See if it's correct. So the next phase now is to check this is the module I loaded just recently. So this will see if it's multi-factor authentication towards this graph API. So hopefully my password is correct. Yep, it seems like it's correct. So this output is saying that we did not have any MFI requirements on this graph API application. So also it says that the MS Online PowerShell modules should work here. So next phase then, I will import a module called AAD internals. This is flagged, so it might not run on all computers. I will use the same username and password as before. Load I will just highlight the token here. So here we can see the tenant information is the same, and the client ID is matching the same as we saw in the MFA function. So this is using the same client ID basically. So with this module has a built-in tool or commandlet to just list all the global admins. So we can basically just run this. And then we found out that myself and Lydia is global admins on this tenant. We can also get some more of the tenant authentication policies. Yeah, so this is a pretty powerful tool, lots of more to it. But what if we cannot load this module in? Then we can use the good old MS Online module. So we'll can import that as well. So now I will loop through all the user objects and principles in the tenant and output that to a CSV file. So it's readable and we can take it out. This will take a little bit longer, but it's pretty fast. So let's go to here, MSLab admins. Let's see it. So this commandlet is also adding the some of the tier 0 role names. So this is also adding medium, which is application administrator, and the two that we previously saw. So this is a pretty powerful tool to check passwords, and NFASIP can go towards several endpoints, like Graph API, Azure Management. So you can play around with this yourself and check your conditional access policies on applications. So moving over to the basic constructs of Entra ID application object. This is pretty important to understand the next demo. So at the top left here we have a enterprise application. This is an application that can be on your home tenant or it can be on an external tenant. And the application object here, or the app registrations on the right, is where you configure credentials and app roles, and you will also see the API permissions here. So enterprise application can live in a home tenant and it can be in several other tenants if it's registered as a third-party application with multi-tenant. So and again, the application or app registration in this picture, which have the client ID, will have can have a secret or it can have a certificate, and this is typically the construct of an Entra ID application. So you have three kind of application types, so to say. So you have first-party applications. This is applications that is developed by Microsoft, and they are designed by them, and they will have the same ID in all the tenants. This application, as we saw in the MFA demo, can have a pretty large attack surface and can be forgotten in, for example, conditional access policies. On the middle here, you have your own applications. This is basically the same. Most of the time it's poorly credential management on this, and often there are too broad of access, which is also what Microsoft reported. And the lifecycle management is very poor on these own applications. And then the third, you have third-party applications, the multi-tenant applications. These are more complex to manage than first-party, and you need to be aware of who is managing them and who has consented into this application. These can ask for whatever permissions they need, and this will be a part of the third party or supply chain monitoring process in your organization. So I've listed up a couple of applications that we might want to limit or at least have control of. And the first one is the Microsoft Graph PowerShell command line 10. This is the recommended tooling for Microsoft now. On the two on the middle here, these two applications are actually in deprecation phase. But as you saw in the demo, I created a tenant 3 weeks ago, and I can still use both of these first-party applications, and they are not protected by any means in the default setup. Also, Graph Explorer is a common tool that you can have a pretty broad range of accesses to and requests, but normally on your behalf. And speaking of on behalf, there's two types of application consents you can have. On the right side here, application consent. This type of consent is also known as admin consent. When an application requests application consents, it's asking the ability to access specific resources, such as user data, organization data, without any signed-in users. So, meaning that this application can act on its own, doesn't need to be any user involved. So basically, if you have a secret or the certificate on this application, you can log in as the application and be this application. On the left side here, you have a delegation consent. This type of a consent is also known as user consent. When an application requests delegation consent, it's asking the ability to access specific resources on behalf of assigned users. This means that the application is only performing operation when the user is signed in and has granted consent. Delegated permission are used in scenarios where an application needs to access resources on behalf of a user. When your app is acting on behalf of the user, it's also constrained by the permission it has. That's where we see this drawing. So the most critical consent is the app consent, or so-called admin consent. When we're creating third-party application in specifically, there's a setting that is often forgotten. That is if we go into authentication on the application, we need to go into the app instance property lock and set this up if they are not enabled by default. And why we need to do that is because of if you have a home tenant and deploying your application in several other tenants, and you have high privileges, ask for this in your application. So a user on the customer tenant, then if a user have app admin, they can basically add themselves and add a secret to kind of your application and log in as that application, and then take control of or use those roles that you have defined. And by setting this resource lock on third-party apps, you will limit that ability, as it says here. So now I will do a demo of a third-party application rights and see how that works. So now I will demonstrate the third-party application and the consent to those. So in this view, this is acting as the home tenant for a third-party application. So this is the kind of home tenant for this demo stuff application. So I created this third-party application here. So if we take a look at the properties of this application, we can see that we have the possibility to go to the application registration part of it. So let's do that. This is where you can specify what API permissions you would have, and you will also see the client ID and that it's managed by this demo stuff application, in this case my tenant, and also it's supported multiple organizations. So this is here you as a service provider would kind of add a secret or certificate or federated credential to log in and act as this application. And these are the application you would ask for on whoever that installs this application on their tenant. So I recently added this app role assignment read write all, but we can add some more roles so we can demonstrate app, or we can tell mail. I want to read write all mail. You should not ask for this, but this is just a demonstration purpose. So now we have all these roles. We have not granted these permission on this tenant. Let's head over to the target tenant here. So this is the target tenant. We already have installed this demo stuff tenant. So if we take a look at this tenant, we can see the properties here, that some of the displayed properties are not available in here. It's sourced in the home tenant. We can look at the permissions. So at the moment we only have these three permissions. So now I will mimic that we kind of reinstall this application in this tenant, and I only, by doing that, I've constructed a URL which using the client ID and the tenant ID of the application. So if you take a look at this ID and go back to the tenant here, this is the demo stuff tenant. Let's see, overview, application ID here should be the same as this one. So this is basically just a construct to install the application. So I will use this URL on the target tenant. Post this. And now you will see the consent flow. So now this application asks for way more rights on our behalf. I will accept this. I have not configured a reply address. That doesn't matter. So if we refresh the credentials here now on the same application, this should be updated. So let's see. Yeah, here we can see mail read write, app role assignment, read write all. And this has been admin consented by admin, since at the moment I'm admin in this demo environment. But this will basically showcase that it's very important to specify the graph permissions correctly and not over permissions on writes. So that kind of concludes this demo. So the last demonstration was about third-party application and scoping of these. This would typically be a sort of attack adversary will do if they have a so-called illicit consent app. They will try to lure you to install high privilege application, so the attacker can gain access to your tenant from within his home tenant without you knowing it. So the next part will be about gaining insights and where to start. So inventory of all applications and their scopes and rights is key. I would start with the so-called tier 0 rights. It's also a legal obligation in DORA to have access or have control on your applications. And as we saw in the previous demo, I set up some mail rights with Graph API. That's really unnecessary because it's something called role-based access for applications in Exchange Online. So most likely all of the Graph mail rights can be removed totally from Graph. So to recap, when creating apps, use the least privilege scopes. If you want to make consumers and customers happy, create gallery applications if possible. So now I will switch over to a demo to show how you can get insights here. So I will be using the tenant that we installed the demo stuff application in and try to get insights in all my applications and enterprise applications. In order to do that, I will use a tool called MS Identity Tools. This is a module written in PowerShell, and it's very powerful. Lots of commandlets here. But to get these insights, we basically only need one command line. So first we import these two modules. I'll zoom a bit. Yep, I will connect to Graph. This will require a consent if you haven't stored it already. So here I'm connected to an application. So the only command I will need is this export command. So this will export it in an Excel path, which I will show later how it looks like. It's very powerful. So now it's downloading all service principal, all enterprise apps, and checking all the delegation. So here it is. So now I will show this Excel sheet. This is very powerful. So here we get a list of the privileged apps, and if we click, for example, the demo stuff that we recently installed, so app role assignment, read, write, all, we get straight to Merrill's webpage. And this again explains how powerful these rights are. So this is very, very handy. Going back to the Excel again, we can have permissions by resource. So if we, for example, press this read, write, all, we can just double click on the number 3 here, and then we will get the applications here. So this is very powerful, and we have permissions by users, privilege rating, nice graph. So this is highly recommended to get insights with PowerShell basically. And it's very easy to install. You basically just install these two modules and you're done. Very quick. So another tool we can use is something called app governance. You will find that in the security portal. This requires license, but it will basically see what the Excel showed, that you will have some applications that is over permissions and is highly privileged, and you will have some incidents and dashboards as well. So if you haven't activated this yet and have license, I would definitely turn this on. It will go and scan your application for about 1 day, and then you will have the data. So this is a native tool compared to PowerShell tool. So to explore some of the basic setups around third-party access and enter the user setting, I will demonstrate this, that we should change the defaults was set up. So we should only administrators should be allowed to register applications, and all the admins should be allowed to consent to applications, and users should not be allowed to do this. So we will go to our tenant very initial did the MFA attack and check a little bit what's happening in that tenant. So this is the tenant with security defaults on, as we can see here. So how we configure this, we can go to enterprise applications, then we can go to consent and permissions. So as we see here, this is the default setup for when I just created a tenant, allow user to consent apps. I would recommend to set to this, as actually also Microsoft recommends. So I'm curious why the default setting is all users. That really doesn't make any sense. Then we should set up an admin flow so we have control of who can so we have some admin control of who can approve applications or not. At the moment, no one can request apps they have not consented to. So this should definitely be changed. So let's dig a little bit about the logging and check what's actually happened when I logged into Diego here. So to check the conditional access policies on Diego, so we can see what happened here. So here we logged in several times with this application with single factor authentication as we was allowed to. So this is as intended, but as you see here, security default is on. So if we want to change this, we need a license and we need to go to conditional access. Then we need to start configuring more policies. So if I try to set a new policies here, it says here, it's look like you're about to change default security. So then we have to disable security defaults and start using conditional access policies, which is recommended if you have a P2 license, and it's really should be mandatory if you ask me. So how we can detect these logs, because you obviously want to have these kind of logs into Sentinel. Then we have to go and ship Entra ID logs into Sentinel or Log Analytics workspace. So I have a slide on that actually. So people are always asking about how much that will be costing. So I have a slide here with some data. So you need the Microsoft Graph activity logs to be able to detect this, and activity logs. But Graph is very important, and as you see here, it's not enormous amount of logs. So it's definitely worth ingesting these logs and enable some detection mechanisms around this. Here are some reference that I recommend you to check, and some of the toolings throughout the sessions I've been talking about. So this concludes my presentation for this year. So if you have any feedback, are curious, feel free to contact me at LinkedIn. So see you at the next event, I guess.